The woman's voice on the other end of the line made a simple request: to care for an 8-year-old child for 2 weeks. He, who had been in a wheelchair for a decade and lived isolated from the world, agreed without imagining he was about to uncover the truth about who he really was and why that child had been placed in his life at that exact moment. The phone rang at exactly 3:47 on a Thursday afternoon, cutting through the steady drumming of October rain against Michael's apartment windows like a blade through silence. He stared at the unknown number flashing on his screen, his finger hovering over the decline button, because strangers never brought good news, not anymore. But something made him answer. Something desperate in the way it kept ringing. Michael. Harrison? The woman's voice was soft but urgent, carrying an accent he couldn't quite place. My name is Sarah Chen. I know this sounds crazy, but I need your help. Michael shifted in his wheelchair, the leather creaking under his weight as he moved away from his computer, where lines of code had been blurring together for the past hour. I think you have the wrong number. You attended Jefferson Elementary, class of '89. Mrs. Rodriguez was your 3rd grade teacher. Sarah's words hit him like a physical blow. Nobody mentioned Mrs. Rodriguez anymore. Nobody even knew about Mrs. Rodriguez except... How do you know that? His voice came out sharper than intended, protective walls snapping into place after 11 years of carefully constructed isolation. She gave me your number before she passed last month. She said if I ever needed someone trustworthy, someone who understood what it meant to rebuild a life from scratch, I should call you. Sarah's breath caught and Michael could hear tears she was trying to hold back. I'm sorry to bother you, but I have nowhere else to turn. The rain grew heavier against the windows, and Michael found himself gripping the phone tighter. Mrs. Rodriguez had visited him twice in the hospital after the accident, bringing books and that same gentle smile that had made 3rd grade bearable. When his parents were going through their messy divorce, she'd been the first person to tell him that being different didn't mean being less than anyone else. What do you need? The words escaped before his rational mind could stop them. I need someone to watch my daughter for 2 weeks. She's 8. Her name is Emma. Sarah rushed through the explanation like she was afraid he'd hang up. There's a family emergency I have to handle alone, and I can't take her with me. Mrs. Rodriguez said you were the kindest person she ever taught, and that you'd understand what it means to take care of someone who needs extra attention. Michael's stomach clenched. He hadn't been responsible for another human being since he'd stopped being responsible for himself those first dark months after the accident. I don't think I'm the right person for this. I mean, I can barely... He stopped himself before admitting his own limitations to a stranger. Please. Sarah's voice cracked completely now. She's special, Michael. She doesn't talk much to strangers, but she understands more than most adults, and she plays piano like nothing I've ever heard. Mrs. Rodriguez said you used to play too before. That word hung in the air like smoke, carrying the weight of everything that used to be possible. Michael's eyes drifted to the Yamaha upright piano that had been gathering dust in the corner of his living room for over a decade, its bench pushed underneath like a coffin lid closing on old dreams. 2 weeks, he heard himself asking though. Every logical part of his brain was screaming that this was insane. Just 2 weeks. I'll pay you, of course, whatever you think is fair. And I'll provide everything she needs, food, clothes, her medications. Sarah paused. She has a mild form of cerebral palsy. Nothing severe, just some coordination issues with her left side. I thought maybe you'd understand that better than most people would. The silence stretched between them, filled only by rain and the sound of Michael's careful breathing. He thought about his empty days, structured around physical therapy appointments and freelance programming work that barely required him to leave his apartment. He thought about the conversations he'd been having with his own reflection lately, discussions that were becoming longer and more frequent. He thought about Mrs. Rodriguez and her quiet faith that broken things could still be beautiful. When? The word came out as barely a whisper. Tomorrow evening, if possible. I know it's short notice, but the situation is... Sarah's voice broke. Again. It's complicated, family things always are. Michael rolled over to his window, watching the rain create rivers down the glass. Below, He could see Mrs. Patterson from 4B struggling with her umbrella, her arthritis making the simple task look monumental. When had he started noticing things like that? When had other people's struggles become visible to him instead of just obstacles to avoid? "Okay," he said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "But I need you to be completely honest with me about what Emma needs. I haven't been around children in a long time." "Thank you." Sarah's relief was so palpable he could feel it through the phone. "Thank you so much. I'll bring her over around 6 tomorrow if that works. And Michael, Mrs. Rodriguez was right about you. I can hear it in your voice." After she hung up, Michael sat staring at his phone for a long time, wondering what exactly Mrs. Rodriguez had heard in his voice that he couldn't hear himself anymore. The apartment felt different now, charged with the possibility of change in a way that made his chest tight with something between panic and anticipation. He spent the next 24 hours in a frenzy of preparation he hadn't experienced since his first day of physical therapy. Suddenly, his carefully organized space looked sterile and unwelcoming through the eyes of an 8-year-old. He moved furniture to create clear pathways, researched child-proofing techniques that would work with his limited mobility, and ordered groceries online with the systematic precision of someone planning a military operation. But it was the piano that gave him the most trouble. Every time he rolled past it, he could hear Sarah's words echoing. "She plays piano like nothing I've ever heard." His fingers hadn't touched those keys in so long that muscle memory felt like a foreign concept. The bench was too high for him to use from his chair, but he could position himself at the right angle if he transferred carefully. At 5:30 the next evening, Michael was positioned by his front window, watching for unfamiliar faces in the apartment complex courtyard below. His palms were sweating despite the October chill, and he'd changed shirts twice before settling on a simple blue button-down that didn't scream "unemployed hermit" quite as loudly as his usual graphic tees. When Sarah appeared, walking slowly, across the wet pavement with a small figure beside her, Michael's breath caught in his throat. Emma was tiny even for 8, with dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail and a bright red backpack that looked too big for her small frame. But it was the way she moved that made his chest ache with recognition, carefully, deliberately, favoring her right side in a way that spoke to years of adaptation and determination. The knock on his door came at exactly 6 o'clock. Michael opened it to find Sarah looking exhausted but grateful, her hand resting protectively on Emma's shoulder. Up close, he could see the worry lines around Sarah's eyes and the tension in her jaw that spoke to sleepless nights and difficult decisions. "Michael, this is Emma. Emma, this is Mr. Harrison. He's going to take very good care of you while Mommy is away." Emma looked up at him with eyes that seemed too old for her face, taking in his wheelchair with the matter-of-fact acceptance that only children possess. She didn't stare, didn't ask awkward questions, just nodded once and stepped forward to extend her small hand for a formal handshake. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Harrison. Mommy says you have a piano." Her voice was soft but clear, carrying a confidence that surprised him. Michael shook her tiny hand, marveling at the gentle strength in her grip. "I do have a piano. Do you really play?" "A little." Emma's smile was shy but genuine. "Mommy says I'm good at it, but mommies have to say that." Sarah knelt down to Emma's level, her voice thick with emotion. "You be good for Mr. Harrison, okay? And remember what we talked about. If you need anything at all, you ask him. He's going to take care of you just like Mommy would." The goodbye was quick, almost rushed, as if Sarah knew that lingering would make it harder for everyone. She pressed a thick envelope into Michael's hands. Emergency contacts, medical information, Emma's routine schedule, and squeezed Emma tight before walking quickly back to her car without looking back. Michael and Emma stood in the doorway, watching the taillights disappear into the evening traffic. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, just expectant, like they were both waiting to see what came next. "Are you hungry?" Michael asked, closing the door and turning back to his transformed living space. "A little." Emma was exploring the room with her eyes, taking in the lowered light switches he'd installed years ago, the way furniture was arranged to accommodate. His chair, the careful organization that spoke to a life lived with intentional limitations. "Your apartment is very neat." "Thank you. I like things organized." He rolled toward the kitchen, gesturing for her to follow. "How about some pasta? I make pretty good marinara sauce, even if I have to do it from down here." As he began pulling ingredients from carefully arranged cabinets, Michael caught Emma staring at the piano with an expression he recognized. Hunger mixed with reverence. The look of someone who'd found something they'd been searching for without knowing it. "Would you like to try it after dinner?" he asked, surprised by how much her answer mattered to him. Emma's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Really? You wouldn't mind?" "I wouldn't have asked if I minded." Michael found himself smiling for the first time in weeks. "But I should warn you, I haven't played in a very long time. I might be pretty rusty." "That's okay," Emma said, settling into one of his kitchen chairs, with the careful movements he was beginning to understand were part of her daily reality. "Sometimes when you haven't done something for a while, it feels even more special when you do it again." As Michael stirred pasta sauce and listened to Emma chattering about her school and her friends and her favorite songs, he couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in his carefully controlled world. The apartment felt warmer somehow, filled with an energy he'd forgotten was possible. But it wasn't until after dinner, when Emma settled at the piano bench with the natural grace of someone coming home, that Michael understood just how much his life was about to change. Her small fingers found the keys like they were greeting old friends, and the first notes of Chopin's Minute Waltz filled the room with a beauty that made his throat tight with unexpected emotion. He hadn't heard music, real music, not just background noise, in his home for over 11 years. The sound wrapped around him like a forgotten embrace, awakening something he thought had died in that hospital room all those years ago. And as Emma played, her left hand struggling slightly, but never giving up, Michael realized that Mrs. Rodriguez had known exactly what she was doing when she gave Sarah his number. This wasn't just about helping a stranger in need. This was about saving them both. The first 3 days with Emma passed like a dream wrapped in chaos. Michael's carefully orchestrated routines crumbled under the beautiful unpredictability of an 8-year-old's needs, but somehow the apartment felt more alive than it had in years. Emma woke up singing, actual singing, not humming, and went to sleep asking questions about everything from why elevators made that ding sound to whether fish ever got lonely. But it was on Thursday morning that everything changed. Michael was making breakfast when he heard it. Piano music drifting from the living room, but not the hesitant, careful playing he'd heard before. This was different, complex, impossible. He rolled quickly around the corner and stopped dead. Emma sat at the piano, her small body perfectly positioned, playing Bach's Invention No. 1 with a technical precision that made his chest tighten with disbelief. Her left hand, which struggled sometimes with simple coordination tasks like buttoning her sweater, moved across the keys with fluid grace that spoke to hours of practice and natural talent that couldn't be taught. "Emma." His voice came out, rough with surprise. "Where did you learn that piece?" She didn't stop playing, just turned her head slightly to smile at him. "YouTube mostly, and some books from the library. Do you know this one? Bach wrote it for students, but most students can't play it this fast." Michael wheeled closer, his programmer's brain trying to process what he was seeing. Emma wasn't just playing the notes, she was interpreting them, adding subtle dynamics and phrasing that suggested an understanding of music theory far beyond her years. "How long have you been playing?" he asked, positioning himself where he could see her hands moving. "Since I was 4. Mommy got me a keyboard from Goodwill because I kept pretending to play on tables and counters." Emma finished the piece with a flourish and turned fully toward him. "She said music might help with my coordination. The doctors said classical piano could strengthen the connections between my brain and my left hand." Something cold settled in Michael's stomach. "What doctors?" "The ones at Children's Hospital. I go there every 6 months for checkups. They measure how much stronger my left side gets and adjust my exercises." Emma's tone was matter-of-fact, the way children spoke about things that had always been part of their reality. Dr. Martinez says I'm doing really well, way better than they expected when I was little. Michael's hands tightened on his wheelchair armrests. Sarah had mentioned Emma's cerebral palsy was mild, but she hadn't mentioned ongoing medical care, specialists, or the kind of intensive therapy that turned children into medical success stories. Does your mum... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Does she ever talk about your dad? Emma's hands stilled on the keys. My dad died when I was 3, car accident. That's why I live with just Mommy, and why she works so hard all the time. She has 2 jobs because therapy costs a lot of money, even with insurance. Words hit Michael like a physical blow. Car accident. The phrase echoed in his head, bringing back the smell of antiseptic and the sound of machines beeping, the feel of nurses' hands adjusting tubes and wires around his broken body. I'm sorry, he managed. That must be really hard. It's okay, I don't remember him much, just pictures and stories Mummy tells me. Emma turned back to the piano, her fingers finding a softer melody this time. But sometimes when I play, I pretend he can hear me. Mummy says maybe he can. The melody she was playing was hauntingly beautiful, something Michael didn't recognize, but that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. As he listened, he realized she was composing, creating something entirely her own that blended technique with emotion in a way that made his throat tight. That's when he heard the knock. 3 sharp raps on his door, followed by a voice he'd been hearing through thin walls for 2 years, but had never directly engaged with. Mr. Harrison? It's Mrs. Patterson from next door. I hate to bother you, but I wondered if everything was all right. I've been hearing the most beautiful music. Michael and Emma exchanged glances. He'd told her about Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who lived alone, whose children rarely visited, who he sometimes heard talking to herself through the walls late at night. Should we answer? Emma whispered, her eyes bright with curiosity. Michael hesitated. He'd spent years perfecting the art of polite avoidance with his neighbors, maintaining the kind of superficial friendliness that prevented deeper entanglements. But something about the hopeful note in Mrs. Patterson's voice made him wheel toward the door. Margaret Patterson stood in the hallway clutching a plate of cookies, her silver hair perfectly curled despite the early hour. She was smaller than Michael had imagined, probably in her 70s, with the kind of bright eyes that missed nothing. "Oh my," she said, taking in the scene, Michael in his wheelchair, Emma peeking out from behind him, the sound of music still drifting from the piano. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Not at all," Michael found himself saying. "This is Emma, she's staying with me for a while." Mrs. Patterson's face lit up like someone had just handed her a winning lottery ticket. "Emma, what? A beautiful name. And are you the one playing piano so wonderfully? I used to teach piano years ago before my Arthur passed. I haven't heard playing like that in my building, well, ever." Emma stepped forward with that same careful confidence she'd shown when meeting Michael. "I was just practicing. Do you really think it sounds good? Sometimes I can't tell if I'm getting better or just getting louder." Mrs. Patterson laughed, a sound like silver bells that filled the hallway with warmth. "Oh, sweetie, there's a world of difference between loud and good. And you, my dear, are definitely good. Would you mind if I listened for a moment? It's been so long since I've heard real music." Before Michael could fully process what was happening, Mrs. Patterson was in his living room, settling into his reading chair with the cookies balanced on her lap, while Emma returned to the piano with the eager enthusiasm of a performer who'd found an appreciative audience. What followed was the most surreal hour of Michael's recent memory. Emma played piece after piece, some classical, some contemporary songs she'd arranged herself, some completely original compositions that seemed to flow from her fingers like water. Mrs. Patterson provided commentary that revealed a depth of musical knowledge Michael hadn't expected, offering gentle suggestions and enthusiastic praise in equal measure. But it was watching them together that did something strange to Michael's chest. Emma, who Sarah had described as shy with strangers, was chattering away like she'd known Mrs. Patterson for years. And Mrs. Patterson, who he'd imagined as a lonely recluse, was animated in a way that made her seem decades younger. "You know," Mrs. Patterson said during a brief pause, I have some sheet music upstairs that might interest you, Emma. Pieces I used to teach to my more advanced students. Nothing too difficult, but they might be fun challenges. Really? Emma's eyes went wide. I love new music. Sometimes I get bored playing the same pieces over and over. I could bring some down later if Mr. Harrison doesn't mind me borrowing his student for a few minutes. Michael found both of them looking at him expectantly and realized he was being asked to make a decision that felt much bigger than it should. Opening his door to Mrs. Patterson meant opening his carefully controlled world to possibilities he hadn't considered. It meant admitting that maybe isolation wasn't the safest choice after all. That would be nice, he heard himself saying. Emma loves to learn new things. After Mrs. Patterson left, promising to return with sheet music and stories about her teaching days, the apartment felt different again, charged with new energy, but also with questions Michael wasn't sure he was ready to answer. She's really nice, Emma said, settling onto his couch with a juice box. And she knows a lot about music. Did you know she used to play concerts before she got married? No, I didn't know that. Michael positioned himself across from her, studying her face. Emma, can I ask you something? Sure. When your mum called me, she said this was a family emergency. Do you know what kind of emergency? Emma's expression grew serious, and for a moment she looked older than her 8 years. She had to go back to Chicago. Her sister is really sick and there's nobody else to help take care of my cousin Billy. He's only 5, and he doesn't understand why his mommy has to be in the hospital so much. Why couldn't you go with her? Because Billy is scared of new people right now and Aunt Linda is too sick to deal with extra stress. And because... Emma paused, choosing her words carefully. Because Mommy thought maybe it would be good for me to spend time with someone who understands what it's like to be different, but still strong. The words hung in the air between them, carrying weight that made Michael's chest tight. Did she tell you that? Not exactly, but I'm not stupid, Mr. Harrison. I know why she picked you instead of asking Mrs. Chen from church or my teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez's niece. She wanted me to meet someone who figured out how to be happy, even when things are hard. Michael stared at this 8-year-old who spoke with the wisdom of someone much older, who saw through adult pretenses with uncomfortable clarity. What makes you think I'm happy? Emma tilted her head, considering his question with the seriousness it deserved. Because you have books everywhere, which means you like learning new things, and your apartment is really organized, which means you take care of yourself. And when I played piano that first night, you cried a little bit, but it was the good kind of crying. People who can't be happy don't cry the good kind. Before Michael could respond to this devastating assessment of his emotional state, his phone rang. Sarah's number flashed on the screen and he felt Emma tense beside him. "Hi, Sarah," he answered, putting the call on speaker so Emma could hear. "Michael, thank God. How are things going? Is Emma being good? I've been so worried." "Everything's fine," Michael said, watching Emma's face carefully. "Emma's been wonderful. We've been making music and getting to know each other." "Oh, sweetie," Sarah's voice softened as she addressed Emma directly. "How are you doing, baby? Are you okay?" "I'm good, Mummy. Mr. Harrison makes really good pancakes, and he has a piano that sounds way better than our keyboard. And I met Mrs. Patterson from next door, and she used to be a real piano teacher." "That's wonderful." But something in Sarah's voice made Michael's stomach clench. "Listen, I need to talk to you both about something. The situation here is more complicated than I expected." Michael and Emma exchanged glances, and he could see the same worry in her eyes that was building in his chest. "What kind of complicated?" he asked. "Linda's condition is worse than the doctors initially thought. She's going to need surgery, and the recovery time is going to be much longer than we planned. Billy is having a really hard time, and I'm the only family member who can stay with them right now." The silence stretched between them, filled with implications that Michael was afraid to voice. "How much longer?" Emma asked, her voice smaller than it had been all week. "I don't know yet, sweetheart. Maybe another week or 2? I'm so sorry. I know this isn't what we planned, and I know it's asking a lot of Mr. Harrison." "It's fine," Michael said quickly, surprising himself with how much he meant it. Emma can stay as long as she needs, too. But even as he said the words, questions were multiplying in his mind. Questions about school enrollment, about medical insurance, about what happened when temporary arrangements stretched into something more permanent. Questions about why Sarah had chosen him specifically, and whether there were details about Emma's. A situation that he still didn't understand. Thank you. Sarah's relief was palpable through the phone. I can't tell you what this means to me. Emma, you be good for Mr. Harrison, okay? And remember that I love you more than all the stars in the sky. After they hung up, Emma was quiet for a long time, staring at the piano keys without touching them. Are you worried? Michael asked gently. A little. Not about staying here, I like it here, but about Mommy. She sounded scared, and Mommy doesn't usually sound scared. Michael felt a protective instinct rise in his chest, stronger than anything he'd experienced in years. Sometimes grown-ups get scared when people they love are hurting, but that doesn't mean anything bad is going to happen to your mom. I know. It's just... Emma's voice trailed off, and when she looked at him, her eyes were bright, with unshed tears. What if something happens to her too? What if I end up all alone like Mrs. Patterson? The question hit Michael like a punch to the chest, because it echoed fears he'd been carrying for years. Fears about being alone, about being abandoned, about being too broken for anyone to love permanently. But looking at Emma, at this brave little girl who played piano like an angel and worried about things no 8-year-old should have to worry about, he felt something shift inside him, something that felt dangerously like hope. You won't be alone, he said, and meant it, more than he'd meant anything in years. I promise you that. That night, after Emma had fallen asleep clutching her stuffed elephant, Michael sat in his living room staring at the piano and trying to make sense of everything that had changed in less than a week. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Mrs. Patterson. I wanted to thank you for letting me spend time with Emma today. She's a remarkable child. If you need any help with anything, shopping, cooking, school registration, please don't hesitate to ask. It would be my pleasure. Also, I have those sheet music books ready whenever she'd like them. Michael stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "Thank you. That means more than you know." As he got ready for bed, transferring from his chair to his mattress with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been doing it for over a decade, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing at the edge of something much bigger than temporary childcare, something that felt suspiciously like the beginning of a real life. 3 weeks stretched into 4, then 5, and Michael stopped counting days and started counting moments instead. Moments like Emma's delighted laughter when he successfully flipped pancakes from his chair. Moments like Mrs. Patterson teaching Emma to braid friendship bracelets while classical music played softly in the background. Moments when Emma fell asleep curled against his shoulder while he read to her, her small hand unconsciously gripping his shirt like an anchor. But it was on a Tuesday morning in November that Michael's carefully rebuilt world began to crack at the edges. He was reviewing freelance contracts at his kitchen table when Emma's school called. The conversation started routine. Emma had forgotten her permission slip for the field trip, but ended with words that made his blood run cold. "Mr. Harrison, we need to update our emergency contact information. We've been trying to reach Emma's mother for 2 weeks about some required medical forms, but the number we have seems to be disconnected." Michael's pen stopped moving. Disconnected? Yes, sir. We've tried multiple times. We were hoping you might have an alternate contact method since you're listed as Emma's temporary guardian. After hanging up, Michael stared at his phone for a full minute before calling Sarah's number. The automated message was brief and devastating. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." His hands were shaking as he tried the emergency contact number Sarah had provided. Same message. Then the backup number. Nothing. Emma was at school, wouldn't be home for hours, but Michael felt panic rising in his chest like floodwater. He called Mrs. Patterson. "Margaret, I need your help. Something's wrong." She was at his door within minutes, still wearing her gardening gloves and carrying the smell of autumn soil. One look at his face and she was moving. putting on coffee, settling into crisis management mode with the efficiency of someone who'd weathered decades of unexpected storms. "Tell me everything," she said. Michael laid out the facts like evidence. In a court case, the disconnected phone numbers, Sarah's vague explanations about family emergencies, the way Emma sometimes looked worried when she thought he wasn't watching, the growing pile of medical appointments and school forms that required parental signatures he couldn't provide. "And there's something else," he admitted. "Last week, when I took Emma to her physical therapy appointment, the receptionist seemed confused about the insurance information. She kept asking about guardianship paperwork and kept looking at me like I was lying about something." Mrs. Patterson listened without interrupting, her experienced hands busy with coffee preparation, while her mind clearly worked through possibilities. Michael was afraid to voice. "Have you tried looking up Sarah Chen online?" she asked finally. Michael realized he hadn't. In 5 weeks of caring for Emma, he'd never thought to investigate the woman who'd entrusted him with the most precious thing in her world. No. Mrs. Patterson's laptop was ancient but functional. Within minutes, they were staring at search results that made Michael's stomach drop. Sarah Chen, age 32, Chicago area. The obituary was dated 6 months ago. "That can't be right," Michael whispered. "That can't be Emma's mother." But Mrs. Patterson was already searching deeper, cross-referencing names and locations with the methodical persistence of someone who'd spent 40 years as a librarian before retirement. What she found made Michael's hands go cold. "Michael," she said gently, "I think Emma's mother has been dead for over a year." The words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to breathe around. Michael stared at the screen, reading the same lines over and over. "Survived by daughter Emma Chen, age 7. Services held at St. Matthew's Lutheran Church. In lieu of flowers, donations requested to children's hospital therapy programs." "Then who?" Michael's voice cracked. "Who brought Emma to me? Who have I been talking to on the phone?" Before Mrs. Patterson could answer, they heard Emma's key in the lock. The sound that had become the best part of Michael's day now felt like a countdown, timer marking the seconds until everything exploded. "I'm home," Emma's voice carried from the entryway, bright and trusting, and completely unaware that her world was about to shatter again. Michael and Mrs. Patterson exchanged looks that carried 1,000 unspoken conversations. How do you tell a child that? The mother she'd been talking to every few days was impossible. How do you explain that the woman who'd carefully arranged for her care might not have been who she claimed to be? Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, backpack sliding off her shoulder, and stopped dead when she saw their faces. "What's wrong?" she asked, and Michael heard an echo of adult wariness that no 8-year-old should possess. "Emma," Michael said carefully, "we need to talk about something important. Can you sit down?" She climbed into her usual chair, but her posture was rigid, with the kind of tension that comes from experience with bad news. Did something happen to Mommy? The question was like a knife to Michael's chest, because how do you tell someone their mother died over a year ago when they'd been talking to her just last week? "Emma," Mrs. Patterson said gently, "who brought you here? Who was the woman who drove you to Mr. Harrison's apartment?" Emma's face went very still. "What do you mean?" "The woman who said she was your mother," Michael said. "What did she look like?" For a long moment, Emma was quiet, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "She wasn't my mommy." The admission hit the room like a physical blow. Michael felt his world tilting, everything he thought he understood sliding sideways. "Then who was she?" "Mrs. Patterson asked. "Ms. Rodriguez, she works for the state. She's been taking care of me since Mommy died last year." Emma's words came out flat, rehearsed, like she'd practiced this conversation in her mind many times. "She said she needed to find someone special to adopt me, someone who would understand about being different and still being strong." Michael's chest felt like it was caving in. Adopt. The families they tried before didn't work out. They felt sorry for me, but they didn't really want me. They wanted normal kids who wouldn't need extra doctor visits and therapy and special attention. Emma's voice got smaller with each word. Ms. Rodriguez said you were different. She said you might actually want me. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of Michael's careful breathing and the distant hum of traffic outside. Mrs. Patterson was crying quietly, tears rolling down her cheeks as she watched Emma's small figure hunched in the kitchen chair. "Emma," Michael said finally, "why didn't you tell me the truth from the beginning?" "Because Ms. Rodriguez said if I told you right away, you might say no because it was too scary. She said people needed time to love me before they could decide if they wanted to keep me forever." Emma finally looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "And I really, really wanted you to keep me." The words broke something open in Michael's chest, some protective wall he'd built around his heart that crumbled completely under the weight of this child's desperate honesty. "But the phone calls," he said. "You talk to your mother every few days." "I talked to Ms. Rodriguez. She was pretending to be mommy so you wouldn't worry about the legal stuff while you got used to me." Emma wiped her nose with her sleeve. "She said sometimes adults needed to believe in temporary things before they could handle permanent ones." Michael looked at Mrs. Patterson, whose librarian instincts had shifted into overdrive. "We need to call the Department of Children's Services," she said quietly. "This Ms. Rodriguez, if she's real, she's violated about a dozen protocols." "She's real," Emma said quickly, "and she's really nice. She just wanted to find me a family that would actually want me, not just feel sorry for me. She said the regular way wasn't working because people see my cerebral palsy first and me second." Michael's phone rang, cutting through the tension like a blade. The caller ID showed the same number that had been calling for weeks, the one that claimed to be Sarah Chen. "Put it on speaker," Mrs. Patterson said. Michael answered, his hand shaking slightly. "Hello? Michael, it's Sarah. I wanted to check in about Emma's school forms. The office called about some missing paperwork." "This is Michael Harrison," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Who is this really?" A pause, then a sigh that carried the weight of someone whose carefully constructed plan had just collapsed. "My name is Lisa Rodriguez. I'm a social worker with the Department of Children and Family Services, and before you hang up on me, please let me explain." Michael looked at Emma, who was watching his face with the intensity of someone whose entire future hung on his next words. "I'm listening." Emma has been in the system for 13 months. Her mother died in a car accident, with no living relatives and no clear guardianship arrangements. She's been placed with 4 different families, and each placement failed within weeks. Why? Because they saw her medical needs as burden, instead of seeing her as a remarkable child who happens to need some extra support. They focused on therapy schedules and doctor appointments, instead of noticing that she's brilliant and funny, and resilient beyond her years. Michael watched Emma's face as Lisa spoke, seeing the pain that flickered across her features with each mention of failed placements. "Emma told me about you," Lisa continued. She overheard her physical therapist mentioning a former patient who'd rebuilt his life after a traumatic accident. Someone who understood that different didn't mean broken. "When I researched you, I realized you might be exactly what she needed. So, you lied to me. I manipulated the situation to give both of you a chance to fall in love before bureaucracy and fear could get in the way. And judging by Emma's progress reports from school and her therapist, it worked." Mrs. Patterson leaned forward. "This is highly irregular. There are protocols, procedures. There are also children who age out of the system because protocols and procedures fail them," Lisa said firmly. Emma needed someone who would see her strength instead of her limitations, someone who understood that being different could be a gift instead of a burden. Michael looked at Emma, who was staring at her hands, her small shoulders rigid with the kind of tension that came from having your entire future discussed around you instead of with you. "Emma," he said gently, "what do you want?" She looked up at him with eyes that held too much knowledge for someone so young. "I want to stay here. I want you to be my dad. I want Mrs. Patterson to teach me more piano songs and help me with my homework. I want to keep having pancakes on Saturday mornings and reading books together before bed. Her voice broke on the last words, and Michael felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. For 11 years, he'd believed that his accident had taken away his chance at a normal life, at love, at family. But looking at Emma, this brave, brilliant, beautiful child who'd survived loss and rejection and still had enough hope left to want him, he realized that maybe normal was overrated. Maybe what they were building together was something better than normal. Maybe it was real. "Lisa," he said into the phone, his voice steady with decision, "what do I need to do to make this legal?" The paperwork took 3 months. 3 months of home visits and background checks and psychological evaluations that felt like auditions for the most important role of his life. 3 months of Emma holding her breath every time an official-looking car pulled into their apartment complex parking lot, afraid that this time they'd come to take her away. But they also had 3 months of small daily miracles. Emma teaching Mrs. Patterson how to use streaming music services, while Mrs. Patterson taught Emma advanced music theory. Michael returning to work part-time, consulting on accessibility software that helped other people navigate technology despite physical limitations. Emma's grades improving as her stress decreased and her sense of security grew. 3 months of becoming a family in all the ways that mattered before the law caught up with their hearts. The adoption hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in February. Michael wore his best shirt, and Emma wore a dress Mrs. Patterson had helped her pick out, navy blue with small musical notes embroidered around the collar. As they sat in the courthouse waiting room, Emma's small hand gripped his with the kind of desperate hope that made his chest ache. "What if they say no?" she whispered. "They won't say no," Michael replied, though his own heart was pounding, with the same fear. "But what if they think you can't take care of me because of your wheelchair?" Michael turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Emma, do you think my wheelchair stops me from taking care of you?" "No. You take better care of me than anyone ever has." "Then that's all that matters. We know who we are together. We know that we're a family. The judge is just going to make it official." When their names were called, Michael rolled into the courtroom with Emma walking beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. The judge was a woman in her 60s, with kind eyes and a smile that reached them before she spoke. "Mr. Harrison, Emma, I've reviewed your case extensively. I've read reports from Emma's teachers, her therapist, her pediatrician, and several neighbors who wanted to speak on your behalf." Michael felt Emma's hand tighten on his shoulder. "In 30 years on this bench, I've rarely seen such unanimous agreement that a placement is not only appropriate, but genuinely transformative for everyone involved. Emma, do you understand what adoption means? It means Mr. Harrison becomes my real dad forever, and nobody can take me away from him, and I can change my last name to Harrison if I want to." "That's exactly right. And Mr. Harrison, do you understand the lifelong commitment you're making?" "Yes, Your Honor. I understand that I'm promising to love Emma unconditionally, to support her dreams, to help her navigate whatever challenges life brings, and to be the father she deserves for as long as I live." The judge smiled. "Then it's my honor to grant this adoption petition. Emma Chen, you are now Emma Harrison, and Michael Harrison, you are officially Emma's father. Congratulations to both of you." Emma launched herself into Michael's arms with such force that his wheelchair rolled backwards several inches. Through the chaos of hugs and tears and congratulations from Lisa Rodriguez and Mrs. Patterson, and the small crowd of supporters who'd gathered to witness their moment, Michael felt something settle in his chest that he'd never experienced before. Completeness. Purpose, the certainty that some broken things, when they came together, created something stronger and more beautiful than either could have been alone. That night, after the celebration dinner and the cake and the phone calls to Emma's teachers sharing the good news, Michael sat beside Emma's bed reading the final chapter of the book they'd been working through together. "Dad?" Emma said sleepily. The word still sent warmth through his entire body. "Yeah? Do you think Mommy would be happy that you adopted me?" Michael closed the book and really considered the question. "I think your mom would be grateful that you found someone who loves you the way she did. And I think she'd be proud of how brave and strong and wonderful you are." Emma smiled, her eyes already heavy with sleep. I think she would like you. You both see the good stuff instead of just the hard stuff." As Michael turned off her bedside lamp and rolled quietly toward his own room, he passed the piano where sheet music lay scattered across the bench, pieces Mrs. Patterson had brought, songs Emma was composing, and hiding underneath it all a simple melody Michael had started writing, a lullaby for his daughter, built from broken things that had learned to sing together. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, covering the parking lot and the playground where Emma would practice walking carefully on icy surfaces tomorrow, building strength and confidence one step at a time. Inside, their apartment was warm and filled with the quiet sounds of a family settling into sleep. And for the first time in 11 years, Michael Harrison fell asleep, knowing exactly where he belonged.